The woman who was pushed out of the room she had once paid to keep was named Nora Whitfield. That night, as Nora stood in front of the old wooden door of Willow Lake Inn, she still did not know that the place once called home had quietly turned her into an outsider long before the lock was changed. In Nora's memory, that lakeside inn always smelled of damp pine wood, of the waffles her mother baked on Sunday mornings, and of the small bell hanging above the front desk every time a guest walked in. But to her mother, Marianne Whitfield, it was not just an inn, it was family history. It was honor. It was the thing she used to keep Nora tied down during the years when Nora should have left. Nora began sending money home when she was 24. At the time, she had just landed her first stable job in Boston, working as an event coordinator for a hotel company. She was not rich. She had just enough to live on, just enough to rent a small apartment, just enough to buy her first decent coat after years of wearing old hand-me-downs. But right then, Marianne called. Her voice trembled. The inn's roof was leaking. The property tax was due. The bank had sent a warning letter. Caleb had just quit his job again. Everything sounded like a storm crashing down all at once. Marianne did not sob loudly. She had never needed to. She only sighed, very softly, then said that if they lost Willow Lake Inn, they would lose the last piece of Nora's father that remained. That sentence struck the softest place inside Nora's heart. Her father had died when she was still in college. Since then, Nora had always felt she had to grow up faster, become stronger, and stand in her father's place between her mother and every storm. Nora made the transfer at the end of that month, then the next month, then the month after that. At first, it was only temporary help. Then it became a habit. Then it became a duty no one needed to remind her of. Whenever she was one day late, Marianne would send one short message. "Are you still sending it today?" There was no blame, no begging. Only pressure, cold as the lake in winter. Caleb was different. He was 3 years younger than Nora, but in Marianne's eyes, Caleb was always the child who needed protecting. He changed jobs constantly, burned money on old cars, weekend trips, and business ideas that never made it beyond a single page. Every time Caleb failed, Marianne said he was just finding his way. Every time Nora was tired, Marianne said she was strong. That was how a toxic family worked. It did not need shouting every day. It did not need doors slammed shut. It only needed to repeat, again and again, that one person was born to sacrifice, while the other was born to be forgiven. Nora could not name it for many years. She only thought this was family. Family was complicated. Family had debts. Family needed someone to carry the weight. But the truth was that Nora was paying for her loyalty with her own future. She had once wanted to buy a small apartment in the suburbs of Boston. She had once wanted to open her own wedding planning company. She had once wanted to marry Daniel, the only man honest enough to tell her that her mother did not need help, she needed control. Nora had been angry at him for saying that, angry enough to stay silent for days. But on those very late nights, sitting in front of her banking screen and watching her balance shrink after every transfer home, she knew Daniel was not entirely wrong. Marianne never told Caleb he had to send money. She never told Nora she had the right to say no either. She told relatives that Caleb would be the one to take over Willow Lake Inn because it needed a man in the house. She said Nora was simply doing well with her job in the city. She spoke as if the money Nora sent home had appeared out of thin air, as if the inn stayed lit by luck, as if the daughter standing behind all of it was nothing more than an obedient shadow. Nora heard those words during a family dinner and smiled them away, but inside her, something quietly cracked. She watched Caleb sitting at the head of the table, talking about his plan to turn the inn into a luxury retreat when he had never even paid an electric bill on his own. She watched her mother nod proudly. She watched Aunt Elaine, the only person who was not smiling, silently place her knife and fork down on her plate. Aunt Elaine knew. Maybe she did not know everything, but she knew something was wrong. She had once asked Nora if she had ever read her grandmother's inheritance papers. Nora had only shaken her head back then. Marianne had said everything had already been handled, and Nora believed her mother. That was the biggest mistake of her life, because some families do not steal from you with trembling hands, they do it with hugs. with stories about love and loyalty, with reminders that blood matters more than money. And before you realize it, they have used your own love to lock you into a role you never agreed to play. In this story full of family conflict, Nora did not yet know how badly she had been underestimated. She also did not know that she was holding real power, buried deep inside old documents, under her grandmother's name. She only knew one very small thing. Every month, money left her account. And every month, Willow Lake Inn still stood there, glowing, warm, full of guests, as if Nora had never been the one keeping it from collapsing. Nora lost everything on a rainy afternoon, but what hurt her most was not the canceled contract. What left her frozen was coming back to Willow Lake Inn and finding someone else standing inside the only room that still carried the scent of her youth. That morning, Nora received a call from Boston. A major client had canceled the entire fall event series. No warning, no negotiation, just one cold sentence from the other end of the phone. The budget had been cut, and they were very sorry. Nora sat still in her office for nearly half an hour, staring at the folder she had spent months preparing, now lying motionless on the desk. To someone else, it was only a contract. To Nora, it was rent money, savings, the dream of opening her own company that had only just begun to glow before being smothered out. She did not call her mother right away. Nora knew Marianne would not ask if she was all right. She would ask whether Nora could still send money that month. So Nora drove back to Vermont in silence, past rain-soaked roads, past dark rows of pine trees, past the cold lake that looked like a mirror unwilling to reflect the truth. Willow Lake Inn appeared beneath the rain, yellow lights glowing on the front porch, the old wooden sign swinging in the wind. From the outside, it still looked like home, warm, familiar, safe. Nora stepped out of the car with her travel bag over her shoulder, telling herself she only needed to rest for a few weeks. She could help her mother welcome guests. She could start over. She had done that many times before. But when she opened the back door and went up the stairs, she saw 2 cardboard boxes placed against the wall. Her name was written on them in her mother's hurried handwriting. Nora's heart stopped for a beat. The door to her room was closed. The handle was new, shiny, cold. She pushed her key into the lock, but it would not fit. She did not need to try a second time to understand. Locks did not change themselves. People only changed locks when they no longer wanted someone to walk in. Inside the room, there was a small laugh. Then the door opened. Brielle Carter stood there in a cream-colored sweater, her blonde hair loosely tied back, holding a new curtain in her hand. She looked at Nora as if she were a delivery person who had come to the wrong address. Behind Brielle, Nora's room had disappeared. The walls had been repainted. The bedding was new. On Nora's old vanity sat a vase of white flowers and a framed photo of Caleb holding Brielle beside the lake. Brielle smiled, sweet enough to feel fake. She said Caleb had told her this room had not been used properly before. Nora stood motionless. For one very short moment, she heard nothing but the rain tapping against the roof. That room had once held her graduation coat, photographs of her father, her first planning notebooks, and the nights when she came home late after serving guests and still sat down to calculate whether she had enough to send money to her mother that month. Yet now, in only a few days, it had been wiped clean as if she had never existed. Marianne appeared at the end of the hallway. She did not run to hug her daughter. She did not ask why Nora had come home early. She only looked at the bag on Nora's shoulder and sighed. She said it was not convenient right now. Caleb and Brielle needed the room to prepare for the wedding. The inn was about to enter a new stage. Nora was unstable, and the family could not take on any more pressure. The phrase "any more pressure" landed like a slap. Nora looked at her mother, the woman she had sent money to for years. The woman who had cried over the phone whenever the property tax came due. The woman who once said Nora was the only support she had. Now that same woman stood in front of her and called her pressure. Caleb came up the stairs right after that, holding a cup of coffee, lazy in the way he carried himself, as if none of this had anything to do with him. He looked at Nora's 2 boxes, then curled his mouth. He said she was grown now, and it was time she learned to take care of herself. That sentence made the cold spread through Nora's chest. Then Victoria Carter stepped out from the dining room downstairs. Brielle's mother, a woman who always wore expensive clothes and spoke as if she were leading a board meeting. Victoria looked Nora up and down, her gaze smooth and contemptuous. She said a place like Willow Lake Inn needed stable energy, a real family vision, and could not be dragged down by people whose personal lives were falling apart. That was when Nora understood that Brielle had not merely moved into her room. The entire Carter family was stepping into this house, not as guests, as owners. Marianne did not object. Caleb showed no shame. Brielle still stood inside the room, running her fingers along the edge of the curtain as if she were choosing colors for her future. And Victoria, an unofficial toxic mother-in-law, had already begun setting rules inside the house Nora had quietly kept alive with every paycheck. Nora asked them when they had decided this. No one answered right away. That silence said more than any explanation could have. At last, Marianne looked away and said they had been discussing it for some time. For some time, not that morning, not after they learned Nora had lost the contract. Everything had been prepared in advance. They had only waited for her to become weak enough to push her out without feeling guilty. Nora bent down and picked up one box. Inside was the framed photograph of her father, turned face down between old sweaters. She stared at it for a long time. She did not cry. She did not scream. Something inside her simply closed, slowly and decisively. That night, Nora drove to Aunt Elaine's house. Elaine opened the door in an old robe, and when she saw the two boxes behind Nora, her expression changed at once. She did not ask many questions. She only pulled Nora inside, placed a cup of hot tea in front of her, and sat down across from her. When Nora finished telling the story, Aunt Elaine stayed silent for a long time. The look in her eyes was not pity. It was the look of someone finally seeing what she had suspected become real. Then she asked a question that sent a chill down Nora's spine. Has your mother ever let you read your grandmother's will? Aunt Elaine's question fell into the small kitchen like a glass shattering on the tile floor. Has your mother ever let you read your grandmother's will? Nora looked up. For a few seconds, she thought she had misheard. Her grandmother's will was something that had been settled long ago, at least that was what Marianne had always said. Her grandmother had died when Nora was still very young, and her mother told her all the paperwork had been handled neatly by the lawyer. Willow Lake Inn belonged to the family. Caleb would take over when he was mature enough, and Nora only needed to focus on her career in Boston. Nora had believed her. Not because she was stupid, but because she had never imagined her own mother could use that trust to lock her out of her own piece of life. Aunt Elaine looked at her for a long time. In her eyes was anger that had been held back for years. She did not rush to explain. She stood up, pulled open the bottom drawer of the old wooden cabinet, and took out a stack of faded yellow envelopes. On the outside was her grandmother's handwriting. Nora recognized it immediately. The letters leaned slightly, soft but firm, exactly like the birthday cards her grandmother had once sent her when she was little. Elaine placed the envelopes on the table. Her voice turned rough. Your grandmother never trusted Caleb to protect that place. She loved him, but she knew he was weak. She trusted you. Nora did not open the envelope right away. Her hand rested on the edge of the paper, ice cold. There are truths that, as long as they remain untouched, can still be pretended away. But once they are opened, life can never return to what it was before. The next morning, Nora went to the office of attorney Alden Price, the man who had called her 3 weeks after the day she was pushed out of Willow Lake Inn. His office was on the second floor of an old red brick building in town, overlooking the quiet main street. Mr. Price was a silver-haired man who spoke slowly, his eyes always fixed directly on the person in front of him. When Nora told him she knew nothing about the transfer documents, he stayed silent for so long that she could hear the wall clock ticking behind her. Then he opened the file. Nora's name was there, not in a note, not as a relative mentioned out of courtesy. Her name was written in the inheritance rights section for Willow Lake Inn. Her grandmother had left 40% to Marianne, 40% to Nora, and 20% to Caleb. Not because she hated Caleb, but because she wanted the person with real responsibility to have a real voice. Nora read the number written in words on the page again and again. 40%. Her share was almost equal to her mother's, larger than Caleb's. In that moment, all the years she had sent money home suddenly changed color. She had not only been helping, she had been keeping alive an asset she had a rightful claim to while being treated like an outsider. Attorney Price turned to another page. When Nora was 24, Marianne had given her several documents to sign under the name of tax paperwork and inn management records. Nora still remembered that day. Her mother placed the papers in front of her after dinner and said they were only procedures to ease the financial pressure. Nora signed because she trusted her mother. She signed without reading carefully. She signed with the obedience of a daughter who still believed her mother would never hurt her. But those papers did not give up her rights. They only allowed Marianne to manage the property temporarily. The dangerous part was that Marianne had used them like a curtain. She hid Nora from the truth, hid questions from the relatives, hid responsibility from Caleb, then built a story that the inn would belong to him. Nora left the lawyer's office with copies of the documents in her bag, but her mind was no longer the mind of someone who had only been wounded. It became sharp and cold. That night, she reopened old emails, old messages, old bank statements. Every line appeared like a shard of broken glass. A message from Marianne said the money Nora sent had saved the inn that month. Another email said that without Nora, Marianne did not know how she could keep Willow Lake Inn. An old message from Caleb had been sent by mistake in the family group and then quickly deleted, but Nora still had the screenshot. He had written that once Nora signed the final paper, everything would be easier. That sentence made her stop. The final paper. This was not about renovating a room, not about preparing for a wedding, not about helping the inn enter a new stage. They were preparing a transfer. Victoria Carter had already hired someone to value Willow Lake Inn. Brielle had chosen a new logo. Caleb had promised his fiancée a property he had never owned. And Marianne had stood in the middle of it all, smiling, crying, talking about family love, while quietly clearing the path for Nora to disappear from the paperwork. This was no longer an ordinary family conflict story. This was a hidden inheritance story wrapped in a mother's tears, in a brother's laziness, and in the cold elegance of a family preparing to walk in through the front door. Aunt Elaine sat beside Nora as she placed each piece of evidence into a thick folder. Elaine did not say much. Nora did not either. There are nights when people do not need comfort. They only need the truth standing still in front of them, clear enough that it can no longer be denied. For the first time in years, Nora no longer asked why her mother did not love her fairly. She began asking a different question. What had they been so afraid she would find that they had to push her out of the house before she could look at the papers? Marianne called Nora on a Thursday afternoon, using a voice so gentle it sounded fake. She said the family needed to sit down together. She said things had gone too far. She said Willow Lake Inn should not be dragged into unnecessary misunderstandings. But Nora could hear very clearly what was hiding behind every word. Her mother did not want reconciliation. Her mother wanted a signature. Nora arrived at the inn just as darkness settled in. The porch lights were still on, and the lake behind the house was black as broken glass. She stood on the front step for a few seconds, looking at the door that had once made her tremble because she had been locked outside. This time, she did not knock, with a shaking hand. She walked in like someone who already knew she had not come there to beg to stay. In her grandmother's old dining room, everyone was already seated. Marianne sat at the head of the table, her eyes red as if she had been crying. Caleb leaned back in his chair, trying to look calm, but his fingers kept tapping against the tabletop. Brielle sat beside him, her lips pressed tight. Victoria Carter wore a dark dress, and in front of her was a neatly arranged stack of papers. Beside her sat an unfamiliar lawyer, a man who looked at Nora with the eyes of someone who believed this meeting was only a formality. On the liquor cabinet behind Caleb sat an unopened bottle of champagne. Nora saw it and understood immediately. They had planned to celebrate after she signed. Victoria spoke first. She said everyone wanted what was best for the inn. She said Nora could receive a small amount of support to start over in Boston. She said signing the papers would help avoid trouble, protect the family's dignity, and allow Caleb and Brielle to continue with their future plans. No one asked how Nora felt. No one apologized for pushing her out of her own room. No one mentioned the years she had spent sending money home. They only pushed the stack of papers toward her. Marianne began to cry. She said Nora was breaking her heart. She said that if Nora's father were still alive, he would not want his daughter to tear the family apart. That sentence should have made Nora soften. Years ago, it would have worked. But that night, Nora saw one thing clearly. People often use family love as a shield when the truth begins walking into the room. Nora placed her hand on the stack of papers, but she did not sign. She looked at her mother, then at Caleb. If I never had a share in Willow Lake Inn, why does everyone need my signature? The room went completely silent. Caleb stopped tapping his fingers. Brielle turned to look at him. Victoria tilted her head slightly, and the thin smile on her lips disappeared. Marianne lowered her eyes. With one question, all of their confidence began to crack. Nora opened her bag and took out a thick folder. The sound of the papers landing on the table was not loud, but it made Caleb's face lose color. She opened the first page. A copy of her grandmother's will. 40% to Marianne, 40% to Nora, 20% to Caleb. Brielle looked at that number, her face turning pale. She turned toward Caleb as if she were seeing the man she was about to marry for the first time. Victoria snatched up one page, read it quickly, then immediately put it down. Nora continued. Bank statements, emails from her mother, old messages, the valuation report Victoria had requested, the draft design for the inn's new name. Each piece of paper landed on the table like a small, precise cut that no one could dodge. Then the dining room door opened. Aunt Elaine walked in with Attorney Price. Marianne shot to her feet. Caleb swore. Victoria immediately changed her tone, saying she had only been advising her daughter and had nothing to do with the internal family dispute. But no one believed her anymore. Attorney Price spoke very slowly. The transfer had been suspended. Every document requiring Nora's signature would have to be reviewed again. Her inheritance rights had never disappeared, and if there was evidence that information had been hidden from her, the entire plan could be cancelled. Caleb slammed his hand on the table. He shouted that Nora was selfish, that she always wanted to be the center of everything, that she did not understand what the family needed. Nora looked at him, strangely calm. She had once hoped he would understand. She had once hoped her mother would apologize. She had once hoped that if she only spoke the truth, everyone would see they were wrong. Not anymore. Nora picked up one email and read it aloud. Without your money, I would have lost the inn a long time ago. Her voice did not shake. No one in the room was even breathing loudly anymore. Even Marianne had stopped crying. Nora said, "You did not throw a burden out of this house. You threw out the person who kept the lights on here." A few months later, the transfer plan collapsed. Victoria withdrew. Brielle postponed the wedding. Caleb lost the right to take over the inn that he had thought was already in his hands. Willow Lake Inn was sold under a legally supervised agreement. Nora received her inheritance share, along with repayment connected to what she had quietly contributed for so many years. She did not buy a mansion. She bought a small house near Boston, with windows overlooking a row of maple trees and a kitchen bright enough in the morning. On the day she held the keys, Nora stood in front of the door for a long time. No one could change the lock. No one could tell her to leave. No one could use blood ties to turn her into an outsider. Sometimes, Nora still remembered Willow Lake Inn, but she did not miss the room that had been taken from her. She remembered the girl who once believed sacrifice was the only way to be loved. She felt tenderness for that girl. Then she moved on. If this story made you angry, comment what you would have done in Nora's place. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay for more dramatic family stories where the truth always finds its way back.